Good evening and welcome back. Curl in and drift with me back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, to the late 1980s, when a red-haired stranger was slipping through neighborhoods at night, and a young woman named Karen Pulley thought she was safe inside the small, brainerd house she shared with friends. She was wrong. By the time the sun rose on October 1st, 1988, Karen would be found on her bedroom floor, her life slipping away from a head wound someone had given her with a piece of wood in the very room where she should have been safest. The man who did it is Harold Wayne Nichols, a serial rapist whose late-night hunting ground was the city itself, and whose case has now stretched across more than 30 years of appeals, reprieves, and death warrants, all the way to an execution date set for December 11th, 2025, on Tennessee's death row. It is the night of September 30th, 1988 in Chattanooga. Brainerd isn't a place you expect to become a crime scene legend. It's a neighborhood of working people and students, older houses and small rentals, the kind of place where porch lights flick on at dusk and young adults share rent and split utility bills while they figure out what comes next. One of those houses is a modest rental occupied by a handful of young women. In one of the upstairs bedrooms sleeps 21-year-old Karen Pulley, a student, a daughter, a friend, a quiet presence in the memories of people who knew her, the kind of person whose biggest worry should have been exams and rent, not survival. Inside that house, late on a Friday night, things are ordinary in the simplest way. The doors are locked, lights off, the sounds of traffic fading, maybe a roommate reading, another already asleep, the house settling into the soft creaks of old wood. Outside, another kind of night is taking shape, because somewhere in Chattanooga, a man with red hair and a growing record of violence is out again. His name is Harold Wayne Nichols, and by the time local papers start calling him the red-headed stranger, he has already shown the city what he's capable of. Home invasions, late-night break-ins, women awakened by the sound of footsteps that don't belong in their houses. He moves through the city like a shadow, a man who, according to court records, roamed the city at night when the urge rose up, looking for houses that were easy to enter, women who were alone, opportunities that ordinary people hardly realized were there. On this night, his path leads to Karen's house. He does not knock. He does not wait to be invited. He comes in the way predators always do, quietly, deliberately, wrongly confident that no one is watching. Upstairs, Karen sleeps in her room. The door between her and the rest of the house is not a fortress. It's just wood and hinges, and the assumption that being home means being safe. When Nichols steps into that bedroom, all of those assumptions die first. He attacks her, a sexual assault, violent and terrifying, a violation of every boundary a person is supposed to have in their own bed. At some point, he arms himself with a piece of lumber, a 2x4 taken from somewhere nearby, and brings it down on her head with enough force to fracture bone and change everything about the next day. When he is done, Nichols does what night predators often do. He leaves. He steps out of the bedroom, out of the house, and out into a dark street that looks exactly like it did an hour earlier. Except now, one of the homes on that block holds a young woman lying on the floor of her own room, bleeding and dying alone. Morning is ruthless when it lands on a scene like that. It comes whether you're ready or not. The next day, one of Karen's roommates wakes up and starts moving through the house in that familiar way. Bathroom, kitchen, coffee, maybe a knock on a bedroom door. But the house does not feel right. Maybe it's the silence. Maybe it's the way one of the doors sits just so. When the roommate opens Karen's door, the world shifts. Karen is not in bed. She's on the floor next to it, lying in a pool of her own blood, badly injured and unresponsive. There is a moment in every story like this where a person's life becomes a rush of very specific actions. Call 911, say the address, say the words, "she's hurt," and "I don't think she's breathing right." Then the sirens, the paramedics, the frantic work to buy back time from the damage already done. They take her to the hospital. Doctors and nurses fight for her as best they can. But blunt force to the head is not a small thing. It is not a bruise or a cut. It is the kind of injury that changes everything in an instant. Soon after, Karen Pulley dies from the trauma she suffered in that bedroom. Back at the house, investigators move in, marking spots, photographing, dusting for fingerprints, trying to read the night backwards from the evidence it left behind. It doesn't look like a fight between lovers. It looks like what it is: a home invasion, a rape, a murder, the kind of case that makes every young woman in Chattanooga look twice at her locks and sleep less comfortably at night. The story could have ended with one crime and one man vanishing into the dark. Instead, it became clear that what happened to Karen was part of a larger pattern. In the weeks and months after her death, reports begin to surface of a man attacking other women. Late-night entries, houses in the same broad orbit of the city, a red-haired attacker, often armed, using cords, knives, or threats to control his victims. Law enforcement starts to understand that they are not just dealing with one terrible night in Brainerd. They are dealing with a predator who is circling. Newspapers and court records later describe Nichols as a man who, when the urge hit him, cruised the city and roamed the streets at night, looking for opportunity, a light on here, a window cracked there, a house that seems easy to enter. By the time all is said and done, he will be tied to multiple aggravated rapes across late 1988 and early 1989. Women who lived through the thing Karen did not. For them, survival is not an end. It's a beginning of its own. Interviews, lineups, courtrooms, testifying about things they never wanted to describe out loud. But their pain forms a pattern, and that pattern narrows the field down to one man: Harold Wayne Nichols. In January 1989, police arrest Nichols on an unrelated sexual assault case. He is now in custody, behind bars, the red-haired stranger, no longer just a rumor in the doorways of Chattanooga. While he sits in a police station, a Chattanooga detective brings up another name: Karen Pulley. They talk to him about the Brainerd house, about the night in late September, about the young woman found on the floor beside her bed. And there, in that interview room, Nichols does something that will hang over him for the rest of his life. He confesses. The detective presses record. Nichols talks. He describes what he did in Karen's room, how he entered, the horrifying things he did to her, how he struck her. That confession will later be called the only direct evidence tying him to the Pulley killing. It will be replayed, transcribed, picked apart by lawyers on both sides. But for the moment, it is simple. The man in the room and the man in the Brainerd house are the same person, and he is saying so in his own voice. From here, the story leaves bedrooms and streets and moves into a different kind of arena: the courtroom. In 1990, Hamilton County brings Nichols to trial for the rape and murder of Karen Pulley. Jurors hear about the night in Brainerd, the late-night break-in, the sexual assault in Karen's room, the blows to her head with a 2x4, the roommate finding her on the floor, the medical examiner explaining how and why she died. They also hear about the other women, victims of his aggravated rapes in December 1988 and January 1989. Women who tell the court how a red-haired man entered their homes, how he used weapons and threats, how he treated their bodies as something he could simply take. Those other attacks become part of what the law calls aggravating circumstances. Evidence that this is not a man who made one horrific mistake, but someone whose pattern of violent sexual predation makes him, in the state's eyes, the kind of offender the death penalty was written for. Then there is the confession. The videotaped words Nichols spoke in that interview room back in January 1989. The defense tries to argue that it should be thrown out, that he didn't understand, that it was coerced, that he wasn't truly waiving his rights. But the judge lets the jury see it, and once they do, the path becomes clearer. The jury convicts him of first-degree felony murder, aggravated rape, first-degree burglary. Then comes the penalty phase. Prosecutors point to the other rapes, to the brutality of Karen's injuries, to the fact that this was not a sudden argument gone wrong, but an intrusion into a stranger's home that ended with a young woman dying on her own floor. The defense talks about his background, his mental health, the possibility that life in prison might be punishment enough. When the jury comes back, their answer is blunt: death. Nichols is sentenced to die for the murder of Karen Pulley and given additional decades of prison time for the rape and burglary in that same incident and for the other rapes he committed. By 1990, his life is no longer measured in neighborhoods and night drives. It is measured in the long, slow crawl of appeals. Once a death sentence is pronounced, the law doesn't stop. It reroutes. Nichols' case moves into the long shadow of appellate review. In 1994, the Tennessee Supreme Court looks at everything: the confession, the way the investigation was handled, the use of prior rapes as aggravators, the jury's findings. In State v. Nichols, the court affirms both his conviction and his death sentence. The justices say the evidence supports what the jury found, that he broke into that Brainerd house, raped Karen, and beat her so badly she did not survive. In 2002, after a round of state post-conviction litigation, the same court denies relief again in Nichols v. State. Claims about ineffective counsel and mitigation do not move the needle. Federal courts get their turn next. From the early 2000s through 2013, his case passes through the Eastern District of Tennessee and up to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. In Nichols v. Heidel, the Sixth Circuit affirms the denial of federal habeas relief. By the end of that process, most of the standard legal avenues are closed. The file grows thicker. Opinions, transcripts, denials. Meanwhile, back in Nashville, Nichols' world is a small cell on Tennessee's death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. He's no longer the man cruising city streets. He's the man who wakes up when the guards say wake up, eats what is brought to him, and waits for the next piece of paper to say what happens next. By 2020, the appeals are mostly done. The Tennessee Supreme Court sets an execution date, August 4th, 2020. The Department of Correction issues an execution advisory. Media outlets list his name and the date, for the first time in a long time. the death sentence feels less like an abstraction and more like a scheduled event. Execution dates tighten everything. Defense lawyers scramble to update clemency petitions and mitigation files. Family members count down days. Advocates and reporters pick up the story again. The man on death row feels the calendar closing around him. Then, the world changes. COVID-19 slams into daily life like an unseen truck. Courthouses slow down. Visits become harder. Health risks explode in prisons where social distancing is more theory than reality. Nichols' attorneys argue that moving ahead with executions in the middle of a pandemic would be more than just harsh. It would be unfair. How do you prepare clemency petitions when you can't safely meet with your client? How do you hold last-minute hearings while the system is locked down? On July 17, 2020, Governor Bill Lee announces a reprieve. The execution of Harold Wayne Nichols will not happen on August 4th. It is pushed back, reprieved through December 31st, 2020, on the explicit grounds that COVID-19 has disrupted the fair functioning of the process. The needle goes back into its drawer, not permanently, but for a while. For Nichols, that means another return to the strange limbo of death row without a certain date. He wakes up on August 5th, still under sentence of death, but alive. When the reprieve expires, nothing in Nichols' underlying case has changed. He is still convicted. He is still sentenced to die. In November 2021, the Tennessee Supreme Court picks up its pen again. In a press release titled, "Supreme Court Sets Two Execution Dates," the court sets a new date for Harold Wayne Nichols, June 9th, 2022. On paper, the state is ready to restart executions, but once again, reality intrudes. In April 2022, just hours before another prisoner, Oscar Franklin Smith, is scheduled to die, state officials discover that Tennessee has not been properly testing its lethal injection drugs according to its own protocol. The problem is serious enough that Governor Lee halts Smith's execution and orders an independent review of the state's entire execution process. With that announcement, all pending executions, including Nichols' June 9th date, are effectively paused. For the rest of 2022, Tennessee carries out no executions. Instead, it studies itself and finds what many feared. For years, the state has been failing to follow its own rules about how it kills people. The system stalled not because of mercy, but because of malfunction. In the wake of that review, Tennessee reworks its protocol. The Department of Correction pivots to a single drug lethal injection using pentobarbital, a sedative that other states have used in their own executions. The new procedure is heralded as cleaner, simpler, less prone to the errors that halted executions in 2022. Once the ink is dry on the revised execution manual, the Tennessee Supreme Court does what everyone knew it would do. It starts setting dates again. In March 2025, the court issues a new set of death warrants. 4 names go onto that list, and one of them is Harold Wayne Nichols. His new date, December 11th, 2025. He is now the man slotted into the last execution spot on a calendar that also holds men like Oscar Smith, Byron Black, and Donald Ray Middlebrooks. And unlike the earlier dates that were overtaken by pandemic and protocol failure, this one sits on a calendar in a state that has already shown it will use the new protocol. By mid-2025, Tennessee has executed men under the pentobarbital procedure. Witnesses describe what they saw. Attorneys collect EKG data, notes, and concerns. For Nichols, those concerns become the centerpiece of a new kind of legal battle. He is no longer arguing that he shouldn't be on death row. He is arguing about how the state plans to kill him and what he has a right to know before that day arrives. Under Tennessee law, because Nichols' crime occurred before 1999, he has a choice most of us hope never to face: lethal injection or the electric chair. If he doesn't choose, lethal injection is the default. But the law does not let him put off that decision forever. He must declare his choice by November 11th, 2025, exactly 1 month before the state plans to execute him. Imagine that for a moment. You are told the government is going to kill you on December 11th. You are also told you have until November 11th to pick your method, chemicals or current. In the abstract, it already sounds like a macabre multiple-choice test. In Nichols' case, it comes with a further twist. He and his lawyers say the state is refusing to give them crucial information about how lethal injection is actually working, where the pentobarbital comes from, how it's tested, what happened inside the execution chamber during the first 2 uses of the new protocol, internal monitoring data like EKG records, the full unredacted execution manual. Without that information, they argue, any choice he makes is not really informed at all. So they sue. They file public records actions and federal lawsuits demanding the documents they say Tennessee is holding back. News cameras pick up the story. Attorneys for Tennessee death row inmates sue, state over execution records. Federal attorneys sue Tennessee for records on executions ahead of a Chattanooga man's death. In those headlines, the Chattanooga man is Nichols. The death they are talking about is the one scheduled for December 11th. And the question hanging over all of it is not, did he do what they say he did? That, in the eyes of the courts, was answered long ago. The question now is, what does a state owe a man before it carries out his death sentence? And what does it owe the public about what happens inside the room where it ends a human life? Thanks for listening. This has been Fireside Crime Stories, where the darkest tales are always read by firelight. If you haven't already, subscribe. And before you go, toss a little fuel on the fire. Hit that like button, ring that bell, so you'll be the first to know when another fire's burning and another story's being told. Until next time, rest well.